Do you remember a time in your life when you thought video gaming was at its peak? When you had the best times with gaming not because of where you were in your life or any other external factors, but because the entire gaming industry at the time was just that good. We call this the golden age of gaming, a time when the industry is at its absolute best. A time of technological achievement, industry growth, and overall a vast positive sentiment amongst gamers, because as the most oppressed class, as we all know, gamers deserve that at least. But I personally think that the golden age of gaming is not right now. Brace yourself, folks, for what I'm about to say. But in my opinion, the golden age of gaming was from the 90s up to 2010. Then it ended. 2 full decades of some of the greatest gaming the world has ever seen, in my opinion at least. And I think this becomes all the more obvious when you compare it to the state that the gaming industry is in right now. You know, in the beginning of this year, there were a lot of people talking about how the modern age of gaming sucks. Small YouTubers, large YouTubers, and YouTubers who professionally watch other YouTubers. They were all saying how much modern gaming is trash, and I agree with them to an extent. In fact, in my video that I made last year, Are Games Just Not Fun Anymore?, I said that they just don't make games like they used to. With this boomer take, I got a lot of people either agreeing or disagreeing with me. People seem really split on this very topic. That's why today we're talking about what I and probably a lot of other people feel the golden age of gaming is. I hope that this time at least I can make my point a little more clearly and maybe convince some people to see it the way I do. But as the YouTubers say after rambling for 5 minutes in an intro, let's just get right into it. The golden age of gaming was from the 90s up until 2010. Okay, that's it. Thanks for watching. But why? Why this glorious 2-decade span of time? What was going on that made it so golden? I mean, just look at some of these disgusting looking games. They look like trash. Well, to explain it, we have to start at the beginning. Back in the day, gaming was a much smaller community, believe it or not. Some people might even consider you a nerd if they found out that you like gaming. Nowadays, it's basically integrated into pop culture. Nearly every single kid nowadays wants to become some kind of gaming YouTuber or streamer. But back then, this just wasn't the case. Either way, this relatively smaller gaming community at the time still got some of the best consoles ever created by mankind. In 1990, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System was released. One of the best 2D consoles of all time, and I'm probably biased because I had this one. There were also other consoles released during this time like the Sega Genesis, the CDI, and the Neo Geo, but the latter two really weren't as popular, at least not in the US, and they seem to kinda suck anyway. Either way, these consoles were known as the 4th generation of consoles, and it introduced us to the insane power of 16-bit processing, an upgrade from the 8-bit era of the 80s. If you try to research what 16-bit actually means, then you might end up confused, so let me dumb it down for you. Here's 8-bit. Here's 16-bit. Basically what I'm saying is we got prettier graphics. There were more colors, everything looked smoother, the performance was better, and the sounds were greatly improved. But what really mattered during this time were the games. I mean, just look at these amazing titles we got on the SNES. Super Mario World, everyone loves that game. The very first Super Mario Kart, Super Mario RPG, probably one of the most fun RPGs I've ever played and introduced us to the Go Geno. Chrono Trigger, another amazing RPG, F-Zero, Donkey Kong Country, A Link to the Past, Earthbound, maybe the greatest 2D RPG of all time, Super Metroid, and of course I have to include this one because I don't want to get any flack, The Magical Quest starring Mickey Mouse. I swear I'm not joking, this game was actually sick. These are some of the best games of this console generation and probably some of the best games of all time, and are still loved and played today through emulation or through buying ridiculously overpriced game cartridges. Overall, it was a super solid generation that brought us some of the best gaming has to offer, but the next console generation was about to blow our asses off with even more technological innovation. The 5th generation of consoles began in 1994. This was possibly one of the most important steps in gaming ever, and that step was 2D to 3D gaming. That's right, we got a whole new dimension to play in, literally. We got the PlayStation, the Nintendo 64, and the Dreamcast. Yeah, there was a 3DO and the Jaguar too, but I mean, like 10 people had those. The Jaguar literally cost $700, and 3DO was like interactive movies or something.
I'm gonna marry a virgin. In the 90s. Okay, so you have a disability.
Either way, 2D to 3D was such an innovation that I really can't overstate this enough. Developers took full advantage of this and gave us even more great titles. Super Mario 64 revolutionized what a platformer could be. Now you could take thick Mario around these worlds in a way that you just couldn't do in the past. Exploration was emphasized by introducing stars that you could collect and a massive move set that you can employ to get around these worlds. I mean, seriously, look at all these moves that we had. As a kid reading this instruction manual, my mind was was blown. As a side note, I really miss instruction manuals. It's just another reason this generation is so great. Kids these days, they won't understand the joy of reading these things in the backseat of a car on the way home after your parents just got you a new game. But hey, what about Zelda? We already had a few games in the franchise, but Ocarina of Time on the N64 revolutionized Zelda and took exploration and dungeons to a different level. We were able to see what a semi-open world game could do. And before you say, actually, it's not true open world, yeah, I get it. Sorry, it doesn't have 8,000 square miles of empty world with nothing to do. The truth is, there were still technological limitations during this time, but in my opinion, it worked towards the game being more dense with content.
It's so dense, every single image has so many things going on.
And during this console generation, many people were introduced to first-person shooters in the way of GoldenEye, which was considered during the time as one of the best first-person shooters ever. Imagine a video game movie tie-in being one of the greatest of all time, but it's true. The gameplay, for the time at least, was fantastic, and the 3D element allowed us to take first-person shooters to a new level. Not to mention the multiplayer aspect, but we'll get into that in a minute. Metal Gear Solid also utilized 3D environments to build up the stealth genre. Now you can hide around corners, avoid cameras and guards. 3 dimensions really helped immerse you in the stealth gameplay in a way that 2D just couldn't do. I can go on and on about how important the 2D to 3D jump was, but you can clearly see it was one of the biggest things to happen during the Golden Age, and brought that much more entertainment out of gaming. And of course, we still had a seemingly endless amount of great games. Across all these consoles, we had games like Spyro, Tomba 2, Rayman 1 and 2, Gran Turismo 2, Crash Bandicoot, Tomb Raider, Mario Kart 64, Banjo-Kazooie, and the list goes on and on. These are just a fraction of the games I can think of off the top of my head. All combined, these titles have sold hundreds of millions of copies and are still played and loved today. Now you might be sitting there saying, pal, you're dumb, these games look like straight dog water. And this is because you are privileged. Okay, honestly, they do look pretty garbage nowadays, but back in the day people would think, wow, how can they possibly make these games look any better? I know it sounds really silly now, but again, this was one of the first times we were exposed to 3D games. And bad graphics don't necessarily take away from a game's enjoyability. Now, before we get into the 6th generation of consoles, which is possibly as important or more important than the 5th, we need to talk about handheld gaming of this era. Sega and mostly Nintendo dominated this market. Sega released the battery-devouring Game Gear, but the Nintendo systems are the ones that people know the best. The Game Boys were critical components of the Golden Age and allowed people to take their games on the road. We had this big brick-looking thing, the OG Game Boy. I played countless games of Tetris on this thing. The smaller version, the Game Boy Pocket, released in 1996. And the glorious Game Boy Color launched in 1998. And get this, it was only $80. At this time, the biggest handheld game ever would be released in the US in September of 1998, and that is Pokémon Red and Blue. These games would change the world forever. Best of all though, they were great games. So great that they became the most successful Game Boy title of all time, selling 46 million copies. Now I know I'm going to sound like a boomer here, but if you didn't live through this time, then you were really missing out. During school lunch, if you weren't talking about how many stars you got in Mario 64, you'd be talking about Pokemon. But enough reminiscing, it's time to do some more reminiscing. Now on to the 6th generation of consoles released from a period of 1998 through 2001, cutting right through the Y2K crisis when we all thought we were going to die. We were blessed with the PlayStation 2, the GameCube, and the Xbox. While these consoles gave us better graphics and gameplay, they were about to blow our asses off yet again with one single thing, and that was online play. Xbox Live released in 2001, and almost immediately 2 million people had purchased a subscription, making it one of the most successful projects Microsoft had ever launched. Xbox Live brought us gamer tags, friends list, and trash-talking 12-year-olds. Now we could play multiplayer games with anyone, anywhere, at any time. It eliminated the inconvenience of how we played multiplayer games in the past. I mean, we used to have to actually go outside for a second and travel to someone's house. And even then, you'd only be able to play with up to 4 people. Now, this really wasn't a bad thing though. It was an incredibly social thing and a lot of fun. And if you did want to play with more than 4 people, you had an option. You could have a LAN party. I'm not really sure if people know what they are anymore, so let Grandpa Palsky tell you all about it. So you would take your console and controllers to someone's house, lug your small yet somehow dwarf star level dense 500-pound tube TV to a spare room, and hook up all the consoles through 100 feet of Cat5 cable to a central router. Was it inconvenient? Sure, but it was damn fun. 16 of your friends in one house, you'd order pizza, and you'd play Halo all night. I mean, this was peak multiplayer gaming, at least for me. It's just another thing that made this age so great. Either way, Xbox Live would make all this more convenient and take away all of the planning of it. Hell, now you didn't even have to have friends. You had the world to play with. So you might be saying, big deal, we have online now. Well, the main difference between then and now is the fact that it was much more social back then. And I think the big reason behind that was because we were actually excited about this new technology. And because we were excited, everyone had a mic. We all wanted to talk to people, whether it be trash talking, working with your team, or actually making friends, believe it or not. In fact, I know people who have made lifelong friendships playing Xbox Live games like Halo or on the PlayStation with SOCOM. It was just a pure gaming experience unhindered by what we have now. What we have now is literal social contracts that basically say you won't be too mean. You can't even have a little fun trash talking anymore. I actually have a friend who made fun of someone for camping in COD and then boom, 3-week ban.
Believe it or not, jail right away.
That in turn cultivates this experience where you don't even want to bother and you just jump into party chat with friends, which is another thing that really took away from the original social experience of Xbox Live. Now we all just hop into a party with our friends and cut ourselves off from everyone else. Unless you're in a clan or a guild or something, you're interacting with a lot less people. It's kind of a weird concept because it just makes the whole online world feel so much more empty, giving us less memorable and social moments. Finally, at the end of the golden age, we had the 7th generation of consoles at the tail end. We had the Xbox 360, the PlayStation 3, and the Wii. These consoles would improve on the graphics and gameplay of all the titles before it. They would continue on with established IPs, but make them even better. Games like Halo 3, Modern Warfare, GTA 4, Gears of War, Far Cry 3, Mass Effect, Metal Gear Solid 4, Dead Space, Assassin's Creed 2, Oblivion, and the list goes on and on. More than anything, this generation really gave us more of what we loved, and it was all still pure gaming fun. And the Wii would bring us even more than that by giving us motion control as well as some of the best games in Nintendo history. Games like Mario Galaxy 1 and 2, Mario Kart Wii, and one of the most fun games of all time, Wii Sports. Don't lie, everyone played this game and everyone loved it.
Nice throw.
Overall, the 7th generation gave us more of what we loved right up until it was ruined with microtransactions, battle passes, and unfinished games, but more on that soon. Out of all of the golden age, this may very well be the best parts of it. 3D games and online play had already been established, and developers continued to improve on that. Games were becoming more polished with better graphics, more mechanics, and more complexity. It was like we were experiencing the culmination of all the great advancements made in the past. So that pretty much sums up why I think this 2-decade span from 1990 through 2010 is so great. Great consoles, great games, technological innovation, social experiences, and most of all, there was much less negative sentiment surrounding the industry. But all of this only explains half of the story of why the golden age is in the past. Now, I said that the modern era of gaming isn't the golden age, and I'm not trying to say that modern gaming is the worst thing ever, but the fact of the matter is that gaming from the 90s to 2010 was simply better, and to truly understand this, you have to compare them. While the modern age has seen a lot of technical advancements, there simply aren't those great leaps we saw in the past. Nowadays, games get better looking, worlds get bigger, and game mechanics get more mechanic-y, and that's great. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the games are great. For example, we have these games now that are procedurally generated. Games that can give us literal entire galaxies to explore. But even that doesn't stop them from being bad. No Man's Sky might have improved over the years, but at the beginning we had a whole universe to explore, and it still sucked. Large expansive worlds with nothing to explore are just that. They're empty. Like I tell myself every night, bigger isn't always better. And how many times are we going to get the same game over and over? I'm looking at you, Assassin's Creed, FIFA, COD, Madden, etc. These games might have been great, but there's just not as much to get excited about as there was in the past. The biggest problem I see with the modern age, though, is microtransactions and all of the problems that come with it. It's like a gaming industry cancer infecting franchises and slowly strangling them to death. It all started in 2006, and if you don't know about this, I'm about to blow your mind off and reveal where this all started. In this year, Bethesda released one of the first microtransactions ever, and it was horse armor, for a whopping $2. They did this to test how much money people were willing to spend on digital trash. While the gaming community seemed like they were in an uproar, sales were still wildly successful, and this paved the way for microtransactions that we see today. While this started in 2006, microtransactions didn't really become extremely prevalent until after 2010. but after this time, a lot of games being developed would focus on squeezing the player dry more than anything else. Quality and content, well, that doesn't matter anymore. That's old news. At the top of the priority list now is microtransactions. At the risk of sounding even more like a boomer, and I'm probably doing that a lot during this, back in my day, games allowed you to unlock new armor or new customization for, get this, free. You could look at someone who had Recon in Halo 3, for instance, and you knew they worked their ass off for it. Very rarely do we get moments like this anymore. Playing a game like Modern Warfare 2, for example, and seeing someone geared out with customization, all I could think is, wow, how much did all that cost? This really goes for any multiplayer game. Not only have microtransactions killed the idea of completing crazy achievements to unlock stuff, they straight up ruin franchises. Look at Star Wars Battlefront. This was an amazing game back during the Golden Age, and it was a peak Star Wars title along with Knights of the Old Republic. But then EA came along and monetized the crap out of the entire series. Star Wars Battlefront 2 was one of the worst offenders, and EA had the bright idea of giving the game literal pay-to-win mechanics. You could buy upgrades that gave you an advantage in the game. Or instead of buying them, you could do the artificially stretched out grind that would take weeks and weeks to unlock anything. When people voiced their opinions on Reddit, EA came in to state that they wanted to give players a sense of accomplishment for grinding to unlock stuff. Hilariously, this comment made the Guinness Book of World Records for the most downvoted comment in all of history. Microtransactions have just continuously gotten more expensive and are the main focus of any multiplayer game. And I don't even want to talk about mobile games, but I have to. These things are basically just money-making machines. They're ATMs for the developers. Look at Diablo Immortal, a once beloved franchise. It was pretty much developed just to get whales to buy stuff. You could spend, and this is not a joke, over a $500,000 just to fully level your character. And guess what? People still spend exorbitant amounts of money on these games. These games are not for you anymore. They exist in spite of you. If you ever find yourself wondering why modern games seem to lack the content in every aspect except for the storefronts, this is why. And guess what? In the past, we never had to deal with this stuff. A game was simply made to be a great game because that was the only way the developer and the publisher made money. If the game sucked, well, no one would buy it and the company wouldn't make a profit. But now the focus has shifted to not making money from sales, but making even more money after the sale. I mean, they literally hire behavioral psychologists in order to find ways to manipulate you into spending more money. This is real. It all brings us to the point of unfinished games. There are so many great titles that we were supposed to get that just get released unfinished because, well, now they can. Look at Battlefield 2042, Halo Infinite, the Master Chief Collection, Cyberpunk 2077, and many more. With the advent of patching games, developers don't really have to finish a game right at the start. They can drip feed you content through updates or seasons, allowing them to release games lacking a ton of content. Live service games are notorious for this. Release a game with a lack of content, looking at you Infinite, and then put more in as you go. This is unfortunately the standard practice now. Rarely will you see multiplayer games with a satisfying amount of content at launch. To compound this issue, people pre-order these games, so hey, the companies already have your money, so who cares at this point? And don't get me started on AAA game studios. AAA game studios have a huge staff and tons of money to put into development and marketing, but this also brings the problem of investors and executives tinkering with the games that the developers are making. They might have no clue about what the community really wants, but they have the final say. And even with all this money, these games can still be released unfinished just to appease the stockholders to start showing profits from sales. AAA gaming used to be looked at as a good thing. More money to develop a game, I mean, that sounds pretty awesome. But today we know that that's not the case, and the community is more fearful than anything when we see AAA attached to a game. Honestly, in the current age, games sometimes seem more disappointing than not. Now, there are some big benefits to the modern age of gaming. We do have an insane amount of access to a massive library of games. We can download them on console, we have Steam, there are thousands and thousands of titles to go after. And maybe patching isn't such a bad thing when used right. Developers can fix things and balance games as they go if there's any issues that come up. Not only this, but indie games are amazing nowadays, and there's just so much out there for us to try. And they're usually way more massive and complex than games we had in the past. And while, like I said, bigger isn't always better, they're still insanely impressive. But with all the negatives, the microtransactions, the battle passes, the unfinished games, quality taking a backseat to profits, and the curse of AAA studios, it all kind of sours the experience. When a new game is announced, you'll often find yourself thinking, well, how are they going to screw this one up? And while indie games are great, that's not an excuse for the franchises we see getting ruined by greedy corporate practices. In my old video that I mentioned at the beginning, People said I wasn't enjoying the modern age of gaming because I wasn't playing indie games, I guess. And yeah, I mean, that's all well and good, but what if I didn't want to play those games? And even if I did, it still doesn't make it any better that franchises people once loved are getting destroyed by modern gaming practices. You can't just say, hey, don't be mad that the games you were anticipating released like a burning dumpster fire. Just go play this indie game. The fact of the matter is that we simply wouldn't see any of this happening from the 90s through 2010. And you could say nostalgia is clouding my judgment and that I just don't like modern games because I have a romanticized idea of games of the past. But I still do love playing some modern games, and there are some great ones released every year. And I still love playing games from the past too. A lot of people do. It's just that when comparing the past experiences to the modern ones, the gaming industry just isn't what it used to be. Back then, if a game was bad, it just sucked and that was it. The developer made a bad game. Nowadays, it could be for any number of reasons. The store is too expensive, they cut out content to make time to develop more cosmetics, the game itself is too expensive, the grind was artificially inflated so you have to buy your way through it, and the reasons go on and on. I think by now you get the point I'm trying to make. Modern gaming isn't a terrible time, it just isn't as good as gaming used to be. And that's why I think the golden age of gaming was in the past. So at the end of all of this, let me know if you think I'm right or if I'm wrong. Either way, I really do hope that the industry gets it together and starts actually listening to people, but at this point the industry seems too profitable to really care what anyone has to say. As long as they keep getting pre-orders and profits from in-game purchases, they don't really have to listen to anyone. Maybe it'll get better in the future and I can make another video in 5 years where I say the golden age of gaming is right now, but currently, I just don't see that being the case. Anyways guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. I spent a lot of time editing this and rewrote the entire script like 80 times to try to be as concise as I could. So if you enjoyed it, consider liking or subscribing because new videos are coming. I have some I'm making right now, but if you want me to make a video on a certain topic, then as always, just let me know. Alright, peace out.